On a warm September afternoon in 2006, the skies over the Amazon rainforest appeared calm and serene. But at 37,000 feet above one of the most remote and isolated regions on Earth, two aircraft were flying along invisible paths that would soon fatally intersect. What happened in those few tragic minutes would become one of the most shocking aviation disasters in Brazil's history. Gol Flight 1907, a brand new Boeing 737-800, and an Embraer Legacy 600 business jet collided mid-air in what seemed like a statistically impossible scenario. The Boeing crashed into the forest, killing all 154 people on board. The Legacy jet, although damaged, somehow survived. But in the days, weeks, and months that followed, aviation experts, investigators, and grieving families would ask the same questions. How could this happen in the modern era of aviation? And who was truly to blame? The story begins on September 29, 2006. Gol Transportes Aéreos Flight 1907 was operating a scheduled domestic flight from Manaus to Brasília, Brazil. The aircraft was a Boeing 737-800, one of the most advanced commercial jets at the time, delivered to Gol just 3 weeks before the accident. On board were 154 individuals: passengers, crew members, families, tourists, business people, and a newlywed couple. For most, it was just a routine flight across the country, a part of everyday life. The flight crew consisted of Captain Comandante Decio Chavez Jr., a seasoned pilot with over 15,000 hours of flight experience, and First Officer Tiago Jordao, younger but competent. The cabin crew welcomed passengers, stowed carry-ons, and conducted the usual safety demonstrations as the aircraft prepared for departure from Eduardo Gomes International Airport in Manaus. The engines roared to life, and the jet lifted off the ground, climbing steadily into clear blue skies. At the same time, 2,000 kilometers away at São José dos Campos Airport near São Paulo, a private Embraer Legacy 600 business jet was preparing for its maiden delivery flight to the United States. The jet, a sleek, modern corporate aircraft, was being flown by two American pilots, Joseph Lepore and Jan Palladino. On board were 5 additional passengers, including executives from Excel Air, the company that had purchased the jet. Their route took them northwest toward the U.S., with a planned stopover in Manaus before continuing onward. The Legacy's filed flight plan placed them at the same cruising altitude as Gol Flight 1907, 37,000 feet. Though this in itself wasn't unusual, air traffic control (ATC) systems are designed to keep aircraft safely separated. It would soon become clear that something had gone terribly wrong. As the Legacy 600 climbed to its assigned cruising altitude, the flight proceeded normally for some time. The pilots communicated with Brazilian air traffic controllers and followed their initial clearances. But sometime during this phase of the flight, the business jet's transponder mysteriously stopped transmitting. The transponder is a critical piece of equipment. It sends information about the aircraft's position and altitude to both air traffic control and nearby aircraft equipped with traffic collision avoidance systems, TCAS. Without it, the Legacy essentially became invisible to the automated safeguards designed to prevent mid-air collisions. Yet, the pilots were unaware of the issue. They continued flying, assuming all was well. Meanwhile, Gol 1907 had reached its cruising altitude and was flying northeast toward Brasília. The two planes were now on intersecting paths, each cruising at exactly 37,000 feet, separated only by distance, not altitude. Ordinarily, such a scenario would be caught and corrected by ATC or TCAS alerts, but not this time. The Boeing's crew was flying blind in the truest sense. Without a transponder signal from the Legacy, their TCAS remained silent. Brazilian controllers, hampered by radar limitations in the remote region and unaware of the Legacy's now invisible status, did not issue altitude separation instructions. As the jets closed in on each other over the forested expanse of Mato Grosso, no alarms rang out. No evasive action was taken. The stage was set for disaster. At precisely 4:56 p.m. local time, high above the Amazon basin, the two aircraft collided. The Legacy jet's left winglet, its wingtip structure, sliced into the left wing of the Boeing 737, shearing off a portion of the larger aircraft's wing and compromising its ability to stay in the air. Inside the Boeing, the sudden impact caused chaos. Alarms blared. The aircraft went into a violent roll. Passengers screamed. The flight crew desperately tried to regain control, but with a missing chunk of wing, the aircraft's aerodynamic balance was destroyed. Gol 1907 entered a catastrophic dive, spiraling uncontrollably downward. For over 3 long minutes, the jet plunged through the atmosphere, eventually disappearing into the dense rainforest below. The crash site, hidden deep within an uninhabited region, took hours to locate. Helicopters and rescue teams were dispatched, but as the night fell, the reality became clear. there were no survivors. All 154 passengers and crew on board Gol Flight 1907 had perished. It was Brazil's worst aviation disaster at the time. Grief rippled across the nation. Families waited in anguish for news. Vigils were held. The country mourned. But even amid the sorrow, there was another aircraft still airborne, damaged but somehow still flying. The Embraer Legacy 600, though shaken and with damage to its wingtip, remained structurally intact. The pilots, realizing something was wrong, began communicating with ATC, trying to understand what had just happened. At that moment, they were unaware of the full extent of the catastrophe. Eventually, they were directed to land at a remote Brazilian airstrip, Cachimbo Air Base, where the plane touched down safely. The occupants of the Legacy jet were unharmed. But within hours, investigators descended on the aircraft. Something unthinkable had occurred, a mid-air collision between two sophisticated jets in broad daylight, and one had survived. The investigation into the tragedy began immediately, led by Brazil's CENIPA, Center for Investigation and Prevention of Aeronautical Accidents, with cooperation from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB. The stakes were high. Aviation safety in Brazil was under scrutiny, and public pressure demanded answers. The early findings were shocking. First, the Legacy's transponder had indeed ceased transmitting for nearly an hour before the collision. This meant that neither ATC nor nearby aircraft could see the jet on their systems. Second, the pilots of the Legacy failed to notice the missing transponder signal or the fact that their TCAS system was not functioning during that time. Third, ATC in Brazil had issued incorrect altitude clearances, placing both aircraft at the same cruising altitude without proper coordination. Layer by layer, the investigation revealed a complex web of human errors, system failures, and miscommunication. Incredibly, the Legacy pilots had at one point been assigned to descend to a lower altitude, which would have prevented the collision, but that clearance was never fully received or executed. Likewise, Brazilian controllers failed to detect the loss of transponder data or to challenge the Legacy's altitude. There was no single culprit. Instead, the crash was the result of cascading failures in multiple safety layers. As the findings were released, public outrage grew. The families of the victims demanded justice. Brazilian authorities charged the two American pilots with involuntary manslaughter, sparking a diplomatic crisis between Brazil and the United States. The pilots were held in Brazil for 2 months before eventually being allowed to return home, though legal proceedings continued for years. Meanwhile, questions swirled about air traffic control in Brazil, the training of private jet pilots, and the reliability of airborne collision avoidance systems. The crash was no longer just a tragedy, it had become a national and international controversy. In the years that followed, aviation authorities made significant changes. Transponder protocols were revised. Pilots received updated training on TCAS and communication procedures. Brazilian ATC systems were reviewed and upgraded. The aviation world learned a painful lesson: modern technology, while powerful, is not foolproof. It depends on human oversight, proper maintenance, and rigorous adherence to protocol. Gol Flight 1907 had revealed the cracks in a system that many assumed was unbreakable. And it cost 154 lives to expose them. Beyond the technical and legal aspects of the crash, however, there lies the human side of the story. The victims of Gol 1907 were ordinary people. Children, parents, workers, students, each with a life full of hopes and plans. Some were traveling home. Others were beginning a vacation. One family lost both parents and a young child. Another lost a mother who was 8 months pregnant. In the aftermath, relatives created support groups and foundations in memory of their loved ones. They lobbied for improved aviation safety and greater transparency. For them, the pain never truly faded. The jungle eventually swallowed much of the wreckage. A memorial stands today near the crash site, a place where loved ones come to remember. Flowers are laid. Names are read aloud. The silence of the forest is a haunting reminder of the moment when two jets collided in the sky, and one of them fell from the heavens. The legacy of Flight 1907 is both tragic and instructional. It reminds us that the skies, though vast and regulated, are still vulnerable to human error. That a missed switch, a lost signal, or an unconfirmed instruction can be the difference between life and death. And for the aviation community, Gol 1907 became a case study, a wake-up call that highlighted how easily a series of small oversights could align into a catastrophic outcome. Investigators and pilots alike began to revisit procedures, emphasizing redundancy, communication, and the need to question assumptions. The tragedy exposed how even experienced professionals can overlook signs when routine takes over. In Brazil, The crash marked the beginning of a broader conversation about aviation safety. It led to sweeping reforms, greater scrutiny of ATC operations, and improved cooperation with international aviation bodies. The nation mourned, but it also acted. Out of the wreckage came resolve. The victims' families pushed for answers, not revenge, and their persistence ensured that the crash would not be forgotten. Today, the name Gol Flight 1907 evokes sorrow but also serves as a symbol. A symbol of how far aviation has come, and how far it still needs to go. A reminder that behind every flight number, there are lives, stories, and loved ones. And that safety, no matter how advanced our technology becomes, will always rely on vigilance, humility, and the courage to learn from tragedy.